right, thanks for opening your garden gates for us. And right now we're going to be talking about my favorite plant family. I'm really looking forward to this. We're talking about the agaves, these beautiful woody lilies, which may surprise a lot of our folks out there that these are actually lilies. I'm joined by Bob Barth, who is one of our routine guests here at the Central Texas Gardener. And I say that in the best sense because you're such an expert in this wonderful field of cacti and succulents. So welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And agaves are certainly one of my favorite groups of plants as well. And, they are, of course, strictly New World plants, even though they have been brought around the world. But
you see them on every continent now.
Oh, yeah,
but
you do.
One of our proud exports from the New World, I would say. And you know, we're going to be talking about the varieties of agave, and really, they've become very popular in the past decade or so. But a lot of people still have kind of a very elemental way of thinking about them. They think of agave Americana and kind of in a unidimensional way. They either get all big or they're going to stay the size that they see them in the pots.
That's true, and that, of course, is not true because there's a great deal of variation in size and in shape and in color too, from dark greens and various other shades of greens, through blue greens and blue grays, and then occasionally you get the variegated ones with yellow, and others with white markings, and some of them with those curly fibers along the edge of the leaves, and so forth and so on. So there's quite a lot of diversity, really, in the group.
Great deal of diversity, I would say, and in terms of the way that you can use them in the garden as well, sun or shade. Uniformly, though, they do all like good drainage.
Definitely good drainage, yeah. And, you know, if you live in an area of heavy clay soils, building a raised bed tends to work very well.
Yeah, use a lot of granite gravel and raise the bed up. That's what
exactly
works very well for me.
True.
Well, we have a small group of plants we're going to start with, and I wanted to show these together at first because at first blush, for a lot of our viewers, they may look at these plants and they think they are all going to grow up to be rather similar, but there's tremendous diversity right here in just these three plants. The one that is in the foreground is actually happens to be my favorite species of agave, or at least the one that I've used. It is Agave parryi truncata. And this is a really small agave.
Yeah, it only gets up to about 30 inches max, so it's not really tiny, but it's a nice manageable size, and tends to be very compact. You know, they sometimes call it the artichoke agave, and it comes from the highlands of central Mexico, but is perfectly cold hardy in our climate.
Well, I love the form. I love the color of this plant, and the fact that it does have that nice compact size. In my last garden, most of them, they hadn't fully matured yet, but they were all about 18 inches in size.
Right.
Now, immediately next to that is what is called whale's tongue agave. And I forget the botanical
That's Agave ovatifolia.
Ovatifolia.
Yeah, and it's a northern Mexico species. It's very cold hardy. Interestingly enough, only in the last few years has it become common in the trade and available for landscape use. You're seeing more and more of it. And it does get large, anywhere from 48 to 72 inches. So that's 4 to 6 feet. And that's mostly width. It doesn't get terribly tall, probably not taller than these 2.5 feet or something.
Broad splaying leaves, hence the name whale's tongue. And very dramatic form, I think, on this plant. I think it's a very striking one.
Yeah, but if you're going to plant that in your garden, you better have plenty of room for it.
Right. And of course, the gray foliage in all these is a tip-off that these are all sun-loving plants as well. Some of the agaves we'll be talking about are not, and we'll call those out as we go. So we've talked about the parryi truncata and the whale's tongue agave. Right next to those is what looks like it's going to be a very compact little plant. That's parasana.
Parasana, yeah. It gets to be about the same size as parryi truncata and is fairly similar, really. And of course, all three of those do like quite a lot of sun, although where agaves grow in my garden, they're going to be shaded part of the day because we have quite a few trees. But.
Well, let's talk about this, because this one thing that a lot of people do make mistakes with on the agaves. They assume they're all desert species that don't like to be watered, that can stand no shade whatsoever. And in my experiences, they all do very well with a little bit of shade, at least some. And occasionally will actually show drought stress if they don't get water.
Well, they will, and it's like last summer, they will tend to turn yellowish, and last summer is one of the few times I've ever had to really water the agaves in my garden to keep them from turning yellowish. I mean, if they turn yellowish temporarily during a prolonged hot spell, when it cools off or starts raining again, they'll go back to their normal color.
Of course, you like to keep your garden looking good, as do we all. Nobody wants to look at pale yellow agaves.
Exactly.
But just to note to people that a little bit of water occasionally is not such a bad thing for these plants. Now, one right next to you, this is one that is highly sculptural. A very striking plant with a particularly vicious terminal spine on it.
Right.
And this is called Sharkskin agave, and it's actually a hybrid form of agave, right?
Yeah, it is a hybrid. It's a hybrid between a form of Agave Victoria Regina, which we'll talk about in a moment, and Agave Scabra, which is a large growing agave. So this is one that really gets a pretty fair size, up to about 40 inches in diameter. But.
And I have to say, I mean, the shark skin is very illustrative of this plant, and the name really tells you what. And you touch this, and it's basically what you would expect a shark skin to feel like.
Yeah, you can feel the roughness,
right.
And that comes from the Scabra plant parent, actually. But
and again, the form on this is rather distinctive. Very fleshy leaves that are almost triangular in a way, and very different looking than the other plants we've talked about. And if you're looking for something for that kind of sculptural effect in the garden, I think this is a really strong one.
Yes, and yes, indeed.
Yeah, and pups out pretty well too. You know, a lot of these, we should talk about whether or not they pup out or are aggressive, because occasionally these plants can kind of claim some territory.
Yes, they can.
Okay, so sharkskin is there, and speaking of territorial, I'm going to pick this one up a little bit. This is one that will, again, spread out and form a nice little clump. And this is striata, agave striata. Doesn't look at all really like the other plants we've talked about.
That is true. And it gets medium-sized, and that particular form of striata, there are a number of different forms, with good sunlight, actually the leaves turn lavender in color, so it can be a very spectacular plant. And the one that I've had growing in a sunny spot in my yard for quite a few years has decided to bloom, and with the lavender leaves and a purple bloom stalk rising up out of the center, it's really spectacular. But the interesting thing about, most agaves, once they decide to bloom, they bloom, and that's the end of their life. But that's not true of striata. Striata will bloom, and then it will go ahead and produce 2 or 3 more heads of leaves.
Oh, great. Great. So striata is one to look for. It's particularly this color form. I've seen it in the green before, and I've gardened with the green form.
Right.
But this color form is gorgeous. Now, right next to it, we have here agave. I never can say this correctly. Schidigera.
Schidigera. I just call it Schidigera. Yeah.
And on the trade, it's called Durango Delight.
Right.
And it is, I think, a fabulous plant. And I love. You can see the curlicue hairs on the edge of this one.
On the edge of the leaves, and there are actually several other species of agaves that we see in the trade that have that same feature, and it also has some white markings on the leaves.
Right.
And it gets up to maybe 2 to 3 feet in diameter, and it's quite cold hardy. likes probably a little more shade than these bluish agaves that we were talking about
Could
earlier.
take a few more hours to shade for sure. And probably the most common small agave is the Victoria Regina. And this one is a really cold hardy specimen.
Yes, it is. The one that is still alive in my garden, it doesn't even show any signs of blooming as of yet. It's been there for more than 35 years. It is at the maximum size for the species of 24 inches, 2 feet. And it survived 4 degrees in 1989.
That's great. There are a couple over here that are shade lovers. We didn't get to talk about those in particular, but I do want to let people know that folks can meet you, Bob, and actually purchase plants from you at the Austin Cactus and Succulent Show and Sale, which is going to be on Labor Day weekend this year, right?
That is correct. Just Saturday and Sunday of Labor Day weekend at the Austin Area Garden Center.
Well, and I hope people will avail themselves of your expertise and your plants at that time. And as always, it's a pleasure visiting with you about these plants, which I could probably spend the rest of the day talking with you about. But anyway,
Right.
Thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I enjoy the opportunity.
Great. All right, thanks, Bob. And coming up next, our friend Daphne.